So I'm the author of Solving 9/11, and as I've said in previous presentations, Solving 9/11 ends the war. I was an investigative journalist in Washington, D.C. when 9/11 started. Here I am presenting evidence at the first citizens' grand jury in Los Angeles. And I'm the author of the Solving 9/11 set of books. And the latest book is The War on Terror, which is a very small book about the War on Terror. The Solving 9/11 set of books investigate various aspects of the false flag terror atrocity. But my main focus is who is behind 9/11 and why was it done. This is the book of original articles. This is the latest book. I wrote this last summer. The War on Terror, The Plot to Rule the Middle East. 9/11 was a policy coup. It was blamed on Muslims. 9/11 was blamed on Muslims in order to start the War on Terror as an operational war. But behind the War on Terror is a covert strategic plan to redraw the map of the Middle East. You might ask yourself, why is the United States in Syria? We have no national interest in Syria. We haven't had it for a long, long, long time. Yet we have troops there. We're occupying the third eastern part of the country from the Euphrates River to Iraq. And we have also occupied the southern part of the country where Syria butts up against both Jordan and Iraq. Why are we there? What's the purpose? Well, 9/11 and the War on Terror were both conceived by Israeli military intelligence in the 1970s, when Menachem Begin, the head of the Likud party, came to power. Menachem Begin is known as the father of terrorism. Here he is. He's the founder of the Likud party. He was born in Russia, came to Palestine in 1942, became leader of the Irgun in 1944, which was a terrorist group, bombed the King David Hotel, killing 93 people, British headquarters in 1946, then was involved in the massacre of the Deir Yassin village, which was meant to scare the Palestinians to fleeing, which many did. And he created the Likud party in 1973, became prime minister in 1977, and promptly invaded Lebanon in 1978. This is the emblem of the Irgun, which he was the head of. It's a Jewish terrorist group, and it's connected to the Netanyahu family, because Mr. Netanyahu's father was the director of this movement, the Irgun, and the new Zionist organization since 1940. Here is both Mr. Begin and Netanyahu. These men are cut from the same cloth. This is the group that they belong to. The great group that they have allegiance to is a group of terrorists. In 1974, a British journalist asked Mr. Begin, he said, how does it feel in the light of all that's going on to be seen as the father of terrorism in the Middle East? And Begin said, in the Middle East? He said, in all the world. So he put on himself the mantle of being the father of terrorism in all the world. That's his words. Well, 9/11 was a false flag terror atrocity that was designed to instill fear and rage in the American population so that we would accept and we would get behind this war on terror. And I have to say, it succeeded very well. 17 years later, we are still involved in the war on terror. There is virtually no public resistance to it, and there's no political resistance to it. But starting the war on terror, the open-ended war on terror, was the primary reason for the false flag terror attacks of 9/11. 9/11 was a policy coup that brought us a global war on terror and a series of disastrous wars across the region. They call it the Long War. And the War on Terror is a suitable title because the War on Terror is the longest and most expensive foreign war in U.S. history. Yet there is no resistance to it. How can that be? How can the American people be so numb to American war fighting in a dozen countries across the Middle East? Well, the main reason is because it's out of sight, out of mind. Unless you have family involved in the war, you don't hear about it on TV, you don't hear about it on the radio, you don't read about it in the newspapers. Not like Vietnam. Vietnam, questions afterwards. Vietnam, we heard about it, we saw pictures on Life magazine. Today we see nothing. Nothing. This is what Donald Trump said in April. He said, we have spent $7 trillion, trillion with a T, $7 trillion in the Middle East. You know what we have for it? Nothing. Nothing. And he's absolutely right. As the author of The Art of the Deal, you would think that he would see that this is a very bad deal and rectify it as soon as possible. The War on Terror is all based, it's not just a name, it's authorization, it's a title, it's authorization and funding. And it was passed 2 days after 9/11, 3 days after 9/11, by the authorization to use military force, which basically gave the president the authority to wage war against anybody he thought was behind 9/11. So, these are some of the places where the authorization to use military force has been invoked. Was Eritrea, was Somalia, were they involved in 9/11? Was Libya involved in 9/11? Of course, we heard about Afghanistan, but are all these countries involved in 9/11? No, of course they're not. But the authorization to use military force based on 9/11 crime has been abused, terribly abused. It opened up the Pandora's box for American open-ended war fighting across the Middle East, around the world actually. The fraudulent war on terror is based on the official myth of 9/11. They go hand in hand. The war on terror is a criminal fraud. We are spending about $400 million per person, per U.S. victim of terrorism per year. So for a cause of death, if you have cancer or influenza, you get pennies. This stack of bills would have to be 1,000 times higher to reflect the amount of money that's being spent per victim of terrorism. Terrorism is not a leading cause of death in this country. The war on terror is an Israeli stratagem pushed by Netanyahu since 1979 to trick the United States into waging war against Israel's enemies. The war on terror is based on the 9/11 lie, and unfortunately, Donald Trump has adopted that lie. He said in August of 2017, 9/11, the worst terrorist attack in our history, was planned and directed from Afghanistan because that country was ruled by a government that gave comfort and shelter to terrorists. And he said that as he increased military presence and effort in Afghanistan. Wesley Clark, who was running for president, this was the man who ran U.S. military forces in Europe during the Yugoslavia campaign. And he said, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're an American, you ought to be concerned about the strategy of the United States in this region. What is our aim? What is our purpose? Why are we there? Why are Americans dying in this region? That is the issue. He said, what happened on 9/11 is that we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it. And we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup, a policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. He should know. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the Zionist neocons. These three people here, Paul Wolfowitz, Dov Zakheim, Douglas Feith, they're three of the Defense Policy Board members who crafted the policy for the Pentagon that was put into effect after 9/11. Here they are, a few months after 9/11, meeting with the Israeli Chief of Staff right here, Shaul Mofaz. He's the highest military person in Israel. And they're discussing what will America be doing. Well, Wesley Clark heard about the memo. He got the memo 10 days after 9/11. He said, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz. One of the generals called me in and said, sir, we've made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. He said, we're going to war with Iraq? Why? I don't know, he said. I came back a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? He said, oh, sir, it's much worse than that. We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. And as you can see from this shopping list of this agenda, all of those countries have been done with the exception of Iran. Now, what's going on here is that an Israeli plan known as the Yinon Plan, which was articulated in 1982, is being put into effect so that countries are being balkanized. That is, they're being broken up into ethnic statelets. You're causing friction between the various ethnic groups, breaking them up into ethnic statelets. That's the name of the game in Syria. That's what they did in Iraq. That's what's happened in Libya, etc. This is the Israeli plan to dominate the Middle East by breaking up the large Arab states and breaking up their armies and breaking the countries into pieces like Yugoslavia. There will be no competition for Israel, and Israel will have hegemony in the entire region. Here's Hillary Clinton. Some people point out that her emblem here is very reminiscent of 9/11. But in 2012, Secretary of State Clinton wrote that the best way to help Israel vis-a-vis Iran's nuclear ambitions is to use force in Syria to overthrow the government. This email proves that the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton sought to overthrow the government of Syria, elected government of Syria, to save Israel, to serve Israel. So that will, if you understand that, you will understand why we are doing what we're doing in Iran today, or in Syria today. I just read an article yesterday that says that the United States presence will continue in Syria beyond the end of the year because the mission has changed. The mission now is to kick Iran out of Syria. So American forces are now in Syria to battle with Iran and push Iran back. Did we choose that? Has Congress chosen that? Has anybody spoken about that? Of course not. This photograph is from the Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus. And this is one of the ways that terrorism is used to destroy the lives of common people. The Palestinians are refugees since 1947-48 in Damascus. And what happened is that ISIS was infiltrated into this camp, ISIS, the terror group, and that brought about fire into the camp. Syrian, Russian, American, whoever was fighting against ISIS in this place, and it destroyed the camp. This camp used to house 120,000 people. Today it houses 200. So these Palestinians were made a target, just like the people of Raqqa, Mosul, or any other place. ISIS is the target, and they put that target wherever they want, and then destroy everything around the target. So the question is, this is from Linda Hurd, a British expert on the Middle East. She says, is the United States waging Israel's wars? She said, there is one thing that we do know. Oded Yinon's 1982 Zionist plan for the Middle East is in large part taking shape. Is this coincidence? Was Yinon a psychic? Maybe. She says, alternatively, we in the West are victims of a long-held agenda, not of our making, and without a doubt, not in our interest. So we're waging war for another entity, for another nation, for another interest that's not ours. And we're paying for it. Our sons and daughters are fighting it. And this is the partition of Palestine. When it happened in 1947, Menachem Begin rejected it. He said, Jerusalem was and will forever be our capital. And Eretz Israel will be restored to the people of Israel. All of it, and forever. This is to give you an idea what Eretz Israel means. It means the land of Israel. And according to people like Menachem Begin, it extends from the Nile River to the Euphrates. And this area right here is the Kurdish area, which happens to be occupied by the United States. This is all Syria right here. This is where the United States is occupying 1/3 of Syria. These are the various ethnic communities, religions, factions in Iraq and Syria. And from the Yinon plan, Yinon said the dissolution of Syria and Iraq is Israel's primary target on the Eastern Front. The dissolution of the military power of these states serves as the primary short-term target. This is exactly what we did when we went to Iraq in first in 1991 and then again in 2003. We destroyed the Iraqi military. If you remember, one of the first things that happened is when we got into Iraq, we disbanded the entire military, sent everybody home. No more jobs, no entitlements, nothing. So the military went away. And in Syria, we've been trying to do the same thing for the last 7 years. Now, this is another break in the here. This area here, Periwinkle, is the area of the Kurds, and this area is where most of the oil is. And the United States and Israel are supporting the Kurdish independence. This area here in northern Iraq and this part of northern Syria. And in pursuing that, the largest holder of the reserves in this Kurdistan area of Iraq is a company called Genel Energy, which is a Rothschild company. So they're going after the strategic assets. And these two cities, Mosul and Raqqa, were targets of the American anti-terrorist attacks last summer, which destroyed those cities, destroyed them. Here's Mosul in June of 2017, the great mosque of Al-Nuri, destroyed in the Battle of Mosul. The Americans we put our artillery around the cities and just pounded them for months. And that has a price. Here's Syria, the other city in Raqqa, in Syria, October 2017. At least half the city is totally destroyed. Now here you have to understand that these are on the edge of the Kurdish area, but these cities are, Mosul is the second biggest city in Iraq. They contained a lot, they were inhabited by a lot of Sunni Muslims. And that's why they were pounded. So we said we were fighting ISIS, but under the pretext of fighting ISIS, we destroyed the cities and pushed a lot of people into become refugees. The northern part of both Iraq and Syria are peopled by the Kurds. And this was the leader of the Kurdish movement in Iraq. He resigned shortly after his failed attempt to separate the country. But I'm showing you the relationship with Israel. Here's his father, Mustafa meeting with the Mossad chief in 1966. Here's his father in Israel meeting with Moshe Dayan. And this is the Israeli flag flying along with the Kurdish flag in a protest or a rally in Erbil. So 9/11 happened. We were very quickly given this narrative, I call it the Zionist narrative, about what happened. And the media has imposed on the public a false story that radical Islamic terrorists were to blame for 9/11. Now, the only way to liberate ourselves and our nations from the madness that we're currently in for 17 years is to expose and understand the true source of the terrorism. If you go away from this presentation, or if you believe that Muslims did 9/11 with all nanothermite and destroying the buildings and fooling the US military, then you will support the logic of war. If you understand we've been deceived about 9/11, the logic of war evaporates. What happened on 9/11 is that the media and the government declared it to be an act of war. Now that's a very important legal term, because that meant that there would not be a criminal investigation, but rather we would treat it as an act of war by 19 Arabs who happened to be supposedly coming from Afghanistan. And based on that logic, we went to war in Afghanistan. But Larry Johnson, speaking about the terrorists, or the alleged terrorists in Florida, he is a former director of counterterrorism in the State Department. He said, "We don't have anything in history to compare with this. The only thing that comes close to it is a former Soviet intelligence operation." Because these are the 19 alleged hijackers, but 15 of them lived in Florida, where many of them had been issued duplicate licenses. Others had passports had been stolen, which meant that somebody was using their identity for them and leaving behind a trail in their name. And we now know from the BBC News shortly after 9/11 that I think 7 of them were alive and well after 9/11. And they said, my picture's being used, my name's being used, but I'm fine. I'm alive. So that raises the question. If at least 7 of the hijackers were still alive after 9/11, who were the people playing the roles of the real hijackers? Were there real hijackings? Was it all a show? Well, about the 19 hijackers, Robert Mueller, who was then head of the CIA, FBI, said in September 2002, he said, "There is no legal proof to prove the identities of the suicidal hijackers." Now, this is an old Mossad trick. If you read the book, The Little Drummer Girl, you'll see that the Mossad tells the actress who's leaving a trail for a Palestinian, the Mossad man tells to the woman, the actress, terror is theater. Theater's a con trick. Do you know what that means? Con trick? You've been deceived. And that's what we are as a nation. The whole deception is meant to deceive us. I went to Germany after 9/11, shortly after, because I knew it was dangerous to be pointing out the lies of the government story when the government was going to war. So I went to Germany for a couple of years and worked out of Berlin. And I spoke to some of the former German intelligence agents, heads, chiefs, and they told me, this guy told me that it looked like a Hollywood production. And he talked about the deathly precision and the magnitude of planning would have required years of planning. And the absence of leaks, he said, was further indication that the attacks were state-organized actions. So what state are we talking about? Another German guy, Andreas von Bülow, told me without hesitation, it's Israel, Mossad. But when I wrote that in my newspaper, he was a little bit surprised, because he said that he told that to every journalist in Germany, but it had never been printed. And he thought it wouldn't be printed in my paper as well, but it was printed. So I'm going to point out some of the key connections, Israeli connections to 9/11. One of the first ones is that when Israel was becoming a state in 1948, before it became a state, the Joint Chiefs of Staff did 13 papers about what this would mean for the American military. And they wrote in the 13th paper that the Zionist strategy will seek to involve the U.S. in a continuously widening and deepening series of operations intended to secure maximum Jewish objectives. And the maximum Jewish objectives were the expansion of Eretz Israel, that means the land of Israel, into Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and the establishment of Jewish military and economic hegemony over the entire Middle East. Well, this is what's going on today, and this is what the United States is facilitating. This is the short list of Israeli terrorism attacks prior to 9/11. In 1944, they killed the British minister Lord Moyne in Cairo. This was done by Lehi, or the Stern Gang. In 46, they sent letter bombs to British officials, including the foreign minister, Ernest Bevin. In 46, they bombed the King David Hotel, killing 93 people. That was British Mandate headquarters. It was under the British at that time. In 1947, Irgun placed a bomb at the Colonial Office in London, which failed to detonate. In 47, Lehi sent letter bombs to the Truman White House. In 1948, Irgun and Haganah bombed the Semiramis Hotel, killing 26 people. And in 1948, Irgun and Lehi massacred the entire village of Deir Yassin. That's all before Israel even became a state. This is the bombing of the King David Hotel. That's Menachem Begin. This was the worst terrorist attack in Israeli-Palestinian history to this point. Then Irgun bombed the British embassy in Rome in October 46. So they were global in their reach. They would go to London. They would go to Britain. They would go to Italy. They would even send bombs to America. They sent bombs to the Truman White House. And this is one of the bombers. This is Yitzhak Shamir. He was the head of Lehi. He was the head of the Stern Gang when they killed this man, the UN mediator Volker Bernadotte, in 1948. Now, when Menachem Begin came to the United States in 1948 in December, Albert Einstein penned a letter with 26 Jewish intellectuals about what Americans should know about the Israeli terrorists, the Jewish terrorists. He was talking about Menachem Begin's party at the time, and he said, the public avowals of Begin's party are no guide whatsoever to its actual character. Today they speak of freedom, democracy, and anti-imperialism, whereas until recently they openly preached the doctrine of the fascist state. It is in its actions that the terrorist party betrays its real character. From its past actions, we can judge what it may be expected to do in the future. Bingo. Now, if Americans had paid attention to what Einstein told them in 48, we would not have had 9/11. Because the same people are involved. The very same party, ideology, and people. What happened is that these terrorists, these are the terrorists of Zionism. Begin, Shamir, Sharon. They came to power in 1977. I happened to live in Israel at the time, and this was a very sad day for labor people because they said, this is the day that the terrorists have taken power. They knew what they were talking about. Then the terrorists went to work right away. Begin invaded Lebanon in 78, and there was a Palestinian attack in Nahariya, and the response was, this man said, kill them all. And they set up a terrorist squad that operated in Lebanon for 4 years. And this is Chief of Staff Raphael Eitan, and he set up an organization called the Front for the Liberation of Lebanon from Foreigners, in which he used car bombs and truck bombs to destroy Palestinian and Syrian targets and to foment conflict between the various ethnic groups of Lebanon. It was very successful. He did it for 4 years. This was revealed in a recent book that came out this year, Rise and Kill First, by an Israeli author named Ronen Bergman. New York Times bestseller. But when they interviewed Ronen Bergman, the New York Times, or when they write about the book, they leave out that little bit of history. That Israel was using a terrorist squad. They would recruit people from the Sunni community, the Shiite community, Druze community, to drive the trucks, and then they would blow them up in places that they needed to blow them up. Because this is not discussed in the American media, because this shows that Israel is a state that has openly practiced terrorism. There's no question about it. Remember the years, 1979 to 1983. And they say that the aim was to cause chaos amongst the Palestinians and Syrians in Lebanon without leaving an Israeli fingerprint. To give them the feeling that they were constantly under attack and instill them with a sense of insecurity. This is exactly the same strategy that was applied to Iraq in the 1990s and since the war. Remember, car bombs going off every day between the communities, driving the people against each other. And this is exactly what they did to us after 9/11. The bombing in Bali, the bombing in Madrid, the bombing in London, 9/11. So that they went global then, and they wanted to put fear into the entire Western world, that we're all insecure. And that's exactly what the terrorism is all about. They want us to feel insecure so that we will support their war agenda. Then in 1983, a nondescript group that had never been heard of before bombed U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 Marines. Caspar Weinberger, Defense Secretary at the time, said we have no knowledge about who did the bombing. This is exactly the same time that Israel was doing exactly this. And we now know from Victor Ostrowski, who wrote Mossadnik, who wrote about Mossad's actions in a book by way of deception, he said that Mossad knew the specific time and location of the bombing, but only gave the U.S. skimpy general information, which was worthless. So they knew about the bomb, they knew when it was going to be, where it was going to be, what the truck looked like, but they didn't tell us. That's like either let it happen on purpose or made it happen on purpose. And it's the worst, it's the largest loss of life among the U.S. Marines since Iwo Jima. Here are a couple of Israeli terrorists from the 1950s. This is Shimon Peres, Pinchas Lavon, and Moshe Dayan. These two characters play a big role in Israeli history, especially in the use of false flag terrorism. This photograph was taken a few months after they were busted for the Lavon affair in Egypt, when they put bombs, nitroglycerin bombs, in American libraries, and British libraries, and cinema theaters, and cultural institutions in Cairo, in an attempt to drive the British and the Americans away from Nasser, away from Egypt. But they were caught. And they're still smiling. Shimon, after it was discovered by the Prime Minister at the time, Moshe Sharett, he said that Shimon Peres shares the same ideology as Pinchas Lavon. He wants to frighten the West into supporting Israel's aims. And this is exactly where we are today. The whole name of the game of the terrorism is to scare us into supporting Israel's aims, to drive us as a nation, as a people, as a military, right behind the Israel camp, so that we become the fighters of their wars for them because we are affected by the fear. In 1967, some people say, oh, Israel would never do that. They're our ally. I would point them to read about the USS Liberty attack in 1967 during the Six-Day War, in which Israeli planes and boats bombed the USS Liberty, a spy ship, which was in international waters off the coast of Egypt, killing 34 Americans and wounding 171. Two-thirds of the crew was destroyed, was murdered or injured. It's the most decorated ship in naval history, and it's the one subject of this war, the Six-Day War, that Americans know virtually nothing about, because it's suppressed. Because if Americans understood, the pilots were asked by the ground control, identify the ship. The pilots called back, it's American, it's American. The order came from the ground control, sink the ship, no survivors. Now, if Americans understood that history, which has been revealed since 2006, they would realize that Israel is a state that will attack the United States when it suits their purposes. This is an attack in Libya in 1986, in which the United States was tricked. Israel tricked the United States into attacking Libya. They rented an apartment in Tripoli, then they broadcast radio transmissions to the apartment in Tripoli, which then went up into the satellite. The American signals intelligence picked up the information thinking that it was coming from Libya, and then went and attacked Libya. This was when they killed Gaddafi's daughter and all that back in 1986. So the war on terror, I'm going to talk a little bit about how the war on terror evolved. It's an Israeli stratagem, how it developed. In 1978 is when this all started to come into fruition. In 1978, Israeli intelligence agent Arnon Milchan made his first film called The Medusa Touch, in which a Boeing 747 crashes into the Pan Am building. Here they are setting up for the film. This is the cover of the book. And here we have it, the same year he made the film, here we have Arnon Milchan meeting with Israeli Defense Minister Ezer Weizman. So you can see he's at the very highest level of the Israeli military. They're making a movie predicting something that's going to happen in the future. Here he is. He's a big Hollywood producer, made JFK, Pretty Woman, Brazil, other films. He's said to be worth $5 billion, but the point is, if you read the book about Arnon Milchan, called Confidential, you'll see that he is the external banker who controls the slush funds that Mossad uses for external operations. That's where the money comes from. And he made this film in the year 2000. Well, his business partner, a man named Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News, Rupert Murdoch's company made this film in 2000, in which a Boeing passenger aircraft is flown into the World Trade Center. And this aired on TV. This plane in the movie was a half-an-hour film, worth watching. It's called the Lone Gunman pilot episode. And in this movie, the plane is remotely hijacked with passengers on it. And the blame is put on the American military-industrial complex. looking for a new enemy. In 1979, this is 1 year later, the head of Israeli intelligence, this man Issa Harel, predicted that the Arabs would attack the tallest building in New York City. He made that prediction to this man, Michael Evans, a Zionist, a Jewish Christian evangelist from Texas. And Harel predicted that the Arab terrorists would attack this tallest building in New York City. That was 22 years before 9/11. And you see the relationship here between Mr. Evans and Menachem Begin. The prediction went like this. They were meeting, and Mr. Evans said, "Do you think that terrorism will come to America? And if so, where and why?" Now, this is 1979. Harel said, "I fear it will come to you in America. America has the power but not the will to fight terrorism," etc., etc. As to the where, Harel said, "New York City is a symbol of freedom and capitalism. It's likely they will strike the Empire State Building, your tallest building, and symbol of your power." He pretended to be ignorant about the tallest building. And in 1979, this man, Bibi Netanyahu, came back from he had been working in Boston for a Rothschild company called Boston Consulting Group in Boston. He went back, this is his father, and they started something called the Netanyahu Institute, in which they began promoting the idea of terrorism being the scourge that the West has to fight. And they had a conference in 1979 called the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism. They blamed all the terrorism in the world on Russia, on the Soviet Union. And George Bush spoke on the third day at the final conference and spoke in support of this preemptive strikes against nations that are supporting terrorism. And Mr. Netanyahu went on to make a career promoting the war on terrorism. Terrorism, how the West can win, fighting terrorism, and calling for the United States to come to the Middle East to wage war against those terrorist entities that were plaguing Israel. Because the Netanyahu logic goes like this. He says that Israel is attacked because the Arabs are opposed to our Western identity, our Western values, our Western way of life. We're a Western nation, he says. And therefore, the West is the target. Therefore, it's incumbent on the West to come and fight the terrorists for us, because we're all the target. So what they did in 1983, in order to have a war on terror, you need to have a foe. So they created the foe. They created the foe in Pakistan using a guy named Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was a very anti-Western militia group. He had called Hezb Islami. And the CIA and the Saudis bankrolled the operation, and the Israelis trained and armed these people in Pakistan. It was done in 1983, in 85 it began, when this man, Ehud Barak, was the head of Israeli military intelligence. And they sent their men and weapons they had taken off the battlefield of Lebanon, took them to Pakistan, and trained these characters, people like Osama bin Laden, in the arts of terrorism, how to make a bicycle bomb and a car bomb, and how to fight urban battles against the Russians. This was meant to be, these jihadis were meant to fight against the Russians, the Red Army in Afghanistan. And in 1983, it was done with Charlie Wilson, this congressman from Texas. He's the one who led the whole thing. And he arranged with the Israelis to provide the weapons and the trainers in Pakistan. And this is him shaking hands with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. But the question is, why would the United States and Britain, why would they be funding and training the most anti-Western of the Mujahideen? This man was rabidly anti-Western. Why would you do that? Because they were creating the boogeyman. They were creating the enemy for the next war on terror, which was Al-Qaeda. And it was done, this is the man, this is Zvi Rafia, the head of Israeli intelligence in Washington, D.C., and he was this man's handler, Charlie Wilson's handler. And this man, Zvi Rafia, used Charlie Wilson's office as if it were his own office. And this is the Hebrew-speaking double agent named Ali Mohammed, who was Osama bin Laden's first trainer. Now, he's supposedly Egyptian, but he speaks fluent Hebrew. Where did he learn the Hebrew? He's a double agent. So he was working with the Israelis, training Osama bin Laden, and creating this. And this guy, he set up the cell that bombed the U.S. embassies in Africa. He trained the men who were blamed for bombing the World Trade Center in 1993. And he trained the men who killed Rabbi Kahana in New York City. And then he was finally arrested and put in jail for bombing the embassies in Africa. He was put in a federal penitentiary in this country, from which he disappeared without a trace. And this is the Gulbuddin's gang. This is when they became Al-Qaeda. in 1994. The Arabs became Al-Qaeda, and the Pashtun speakers became Taliban. Then Israeli Mossad got the contract for the World Trade Center in 1987, a security contract, anti-terrorism security contract. And it went to this man, Avraham Shalom Ben-Dor. He was the head of Shin Bet. He was involved in a murder in Palestine, in Israel, of a couple Palestinians, and he came to America and was the president of this company, Atwell Security, who got the contract for the World Trade Center. But when the Port Authority discovered, this is Zvi Malkin and Shalom Ben-Dor, when the Port Authority discovered that this man was using a fake name and he'd been convicted of murder in Israel, they tore up the contract. Had they not torn up the contract in 1987, 9/11 probably would have happened in the 1980s or early 1990s. But they were rejected by the Port Authority. They didn't go home to Israel. They didn't give up the plan. They went to work for a couple American Jews who did have inside in the Pentagon, Maurice Greenberg and Jules Kroll. And Jules Kroll had a company called Kroll Associates who got the security contract for the World Trade Center in 1993 after the first bombing. And at that point, Shalom Ben-Dor was working for him. And in 1992, this son of a terrorist, this is Rahm Emanuel, mayor of Chicago right now. His father was a member of that Stern gang, the Leahy gang. This man became the senior advisor to Bill Clinton. This is the guy that set up the whole Lewinsky thing, but he was also instrumental. He was the Mossad's man in the White House, so that he made sure that the right people got appointed to the bench, the right appointments were made under Clinton to make the 9/11 project move forward. And his father was a member of Leahy. He served in the Israeli army, yet he was the senior advisor to the White House. This is the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. And in this case, Michael Chertoff was the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. He played a key role in the prosecution in which Muslims were blamed for the bombing. The 6 people were killed. Chertoff oversaw the prosecution, and Judge Mukasey oversaw the actual trial. And in the trial, the FBI, who was involved in actually making the truck bomb, they paid this man $1 million. This is another Egyptian colonel. This man was the guy who ran the sting operation in which these guys were stung. And he used wires and recorded so that they became indictable. And he testified. He was paid $1 million. This guy, Imad Salem, was paid $1 million to testify against these other fellows that he had rounded up. And then he went into the witness protection program, new name, new face. And then this ideation of the war on terror, or of the 9/11, came out in this article in Foreign Affairs, in which Philip Zelikow, John Deutsch, and Ashton Carter wrote about catastrophic terrorism, how this would be something that could happen next month. And in this article, they had a study group. They imagined the transforming event. They imagined the event like 9/11 that would change America fundamentally, change our policies, our foreign policy, our domestic policy, change the nation. This was printed in Christmas 1998. 2 of the authors, Ashton Carter and John Deutsch, worked for a company called Global Technology Partners, which is an exclusive affiliate of Rothschild North America. I point out these Rothschild connections because they are throughout the entire saga. You find that one step removed from the crime, you find a Rothschild connection. And the Rothschilds are, of course, the bankers that control our Federal Reserve System and other countries' central banks. So 9/11, the new Pearl Harbor. The Zionist neocons had called for a new Pearl Harbor in order to effect the change they needed to see. This is the Project for a New American Century, run by the Kagan family. These are some of the signatories to the document. And they had imagined that this revolutionary change that they saw turning America into the global police force would require a catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And in 2001, an Israeli Mossad company, Rothschild company, called ICTS, controlled security at the U.S. airports. And these are the 3 principals. Here is Yitzhak Shamir's son, Yair Shamir. This is Kuckerman, and this is Boaz Harel. They ran the company that either let these guys on the airplane or didn't. But their company was excused from the process, and so we'll never know unless we have some change in the attitude about 9/11. And then in July 2001, Zionists, that's Strong Supporters of Israel, got the lease for the World Trade Center. It became their property. And that was done through a man named Ron Lauder, the son of Estee Lauder. And he, in Israel, he works together with Major General Daniel Rothschild at Mossad University. He has a school there, and he runs the Institute for Policy and Strategy. This man was put in charge of privatizing New York property for Governor Pataki. He oversaw the privatization efforts of New York State, in which they decided to privatize the World Trade Center, because the World Trade Center was public property prior to 9/11. And then it went from the Port Authority, this man, Lou Eisenberg, he transferred, after negotiations, the property to this man, Larry Silverstein. But these men are connected through something called the UJA Federation of New York, which is a Zionist fundraising operation, where he's the national chairman and he is on the board of the planning board. And again, Larry Silverstein, the man who got the World Trade Center lease for 99 years, is this man here. He had weekly phone calls every Sunday afternoon with Benjamin Netanyahu. Then in July 24th, 2001, he got the keys to the front door of the World Trade Center. This is what was left 5 weeks later. On 9/11, Ehud Olmert, Israel's deputy prime minister, was on a secret visit to New York City. This was taken about 2 weeks later, but he was there on September 10th and September 11th in New York City. Here he is with Netanyahu. By the way, he wound up spending a couple years in jail recently for bribery. Here he is after he came back from his 10 days away in Israel. He came back to the United States, and since New York City and Jerusalem are sister cities, and he was the mayor of Jerusalem and the deputy prime minister of Israel, he acted like the big brother to Rudy Giuliani. But on September 11th, when all civilian flights were grounded in this country, one full El Al Boeing 747 took off from JFK bound for Tel Aviv. The flight departed at 4:11 with U.S. military officials on the scene, authorizing and clearing the flight for takeoff. Who was on that plane? Well, obviously, Ehud Olmert was one of the people on the plane. This is about the put options. You may have heard about the put options that in which people profited by knowing that the stocks of the airlines and insurance companies would tank on 9/11. And the 95% of these options were put by this man's former company. Now, this man is Buzzy Krongard, and on 9/11 he was executive director of the CIA. But before he became executive director of the CIA, he was the director of Alex Brown, the company that placed the put options. And here's the relationship between Alvin Krongard. Alvin Krongard and his wife, and his wife works directly with Rothschild Asset Management. And then there were thousands of Israelis who were warned about 9/11, and there were 4,000 who were expected to have been at the World Trade Center that day or the Pentagon. And that comes from the U.S. That comes from the Israeli Foreign Ministry. That's not Arab propaganda. It's from the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And apparently they got the message through a system called Odigo, which warned people who had that Israeli system of messaging not to go to the World Trade Center that day. The message went out, the warning message went out about 2 or 3 hours before it happened. It warned people not to be at the World Trade Center at 8:45 because all hell would break loose. So apparently, of those 4,000 Israelis who avoided harm got the message. They got the memo. And then there were these 5 dancing Israelis who were seen celebrating and high-fiving the attack at the World Trade Center before the first plane struck. They were on the New Jersey side of the river, and they were photographing and high-fiving, and they were observed, and they were arrested on the afternoon of 9/11. It was written about in the New Jersey newspapers, but it was not reported in any other paper outside of New Jersey. The 2 men that did not appear, they're on TV show, these 3 guys are on a TV show. They said, we're not Mossad. No, because the 2 Mossad guys are sitting in the audience. The Kurtzberg brothers were sitting in the audience because they could not go up on the stage and say, we're not Mossad. They are Mossad. And U.S. law enforcement knew it from the minute they arrested these guys that they're Mossad. And one of the guys, this is one of the minions, he said, our purpose was to document the event. Here's the head of the company, behind these Foster Grants here, Dominic Suter. He fled the country on the 12th or the 13th, and when the FBI went to get him again, he was gone. And this is one of the trucks of their company. They had this truck that was reported by New York police, Urban Moving Systems. It wasn't a moving company at all. It was a front company. It was set up to facilitate the 9/11 attacks. And they had this truck with the picture of the World Trade Center being struck by a plane. Now, on 9/11, when it happened in the studio, the London studio of the BBC World Television, the largest English-speaking broadcasting in the world, who was there except Ehud Barak, ready to give the interpretation? Remember, the General Wesley Clark said we did not have American understanding of it. No, what he's implying is that we had a foreign country's understanding of it. We had Israeli understanding. The Israelis interpreted 9/11 for us. This man, the head of, former defense minister, chief of staff, he said, the world will never be the same from today on. We know who's behind this, Osama bin Laden, and we know where he is. He said, it's time to launch an operational, concrete war against terror. Full stop. And that's what we've been doing for the last 17 years, following the Israeli diktat, living our lives according to the Israeli interpretation of 9/11. That's what they've imposed on us. They've imposed a Zionist narrative to explain what happened on 9/11. Here's Bibi Netanyahu. And on 9/11, he praised the attacks because they had kickstarted his war on terror that he'd been pushing uphill for the last 20 years. He told the New York Times, he was asked, how will this affect American-Israeli relations? He said, it's very good, he said. When 30,000 people are expected to be in the pile, he said, it's very good. It will generate immediate sympathy. And the relationship between Netanyahu and Barak is that Barak was his commander in the Sayeret Matkal, a covert commando force of Israeli military intelligence. And Bibi Netanyahu spoke the next day, September 12th, in Jerusalem. He said, we must build a coalition against terror today. It's time to take on the militant Islamic regimes with a great deal of strength. We should crush the terrorist infrastructure that threatens the entire free world. Yet if you look at the coalition that's put together in Syria or in Iraq, you will never find the Israeli flag, because the Israelis are the ones who are running the operation but keep their fingers out of it. But you see now in Syria, you see the Israelis are now bombing every day. They're attacking Syria on a daily basis. And they were the ones who actually got the Russian plane shot down. Their 4 fighters came over and were striking Syria, putting the slow-moving Russian reconnaissance plane in the middle. And it got shot. And he also said, Netanyahu said in 2001, he said, I know what America is. America is a thing you can move very easily. Move it in the right direction. That's what they're doing to us. They're pulling us around like an ox with a ring in its nose. And he said, we are benefiting. This is him speaking to an Israeli audience. He said, we are benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the American struggle in Iraq. He said that in 2008. And then there was an Israeli son of the Mossad who controlled the 9/11 investigation. This is the man, Michael Chertoff. He was put in charge of the investigation, which became a non-investigation, in which the evidence was destroyed. And for day-to-day decisions, Chertoff had the last word. Then he became Homeland Security Czar in 2005. In this position, he maintained his control of the evidence of 9/11. Controlling the evidence, destroying the evidence was the key aspect of his work. And the evidence was destroyed from the day one. This is some of the steel that was piled up, that was a big pile of steel. And they began right away carting this steel off to a couple Zionist junkyards where it was destroyed 24/7, cut into small pieces, mixed with other scrap, and sent to Asia for destruction. Because the steel would provide evidence of what really caused the towers to fall. And then the Zionists presided over the 9/11 lawsuits and litigation. This is the judge, Alvin K. Hellerstein. There was a fundamental conflict of interest, though. His son worked for a law firm in Israel that represented ICTS, the company that was overseeing security at the airports on 9/11, in Boston, in Newark, in Dulles. Here's the relationship. His son was working for a company that was the parent company of ICTS. And that same group of people, ICTS, was in the tort litigation that he oversaw for the families of 9/11. That's a primary family conflict of interest. And the Zionists also oversaw the settlements of the money. This man dished out the money for the first 2,900 families. His name is Kenneth Feinberg, very high-level Zionist. This is Sheila Birnbaum. She oversaw the war of attrition against the 96 families. There were 96 families who held out for a day in court. They never got it. One by one, they were settled out of court. And the Zionists control the 9/11 myth and the legacy. This is the ground zero. This is the World Trade Center Memorial. And they control the interpretation of the event. Was given to us by this 9/11 Commission report by this man, Philip Zelikow, who's an expert at creating public myths. And he came to the table as executive director of the commission with a complete outline already finished before the staff even began working. So he had prepared the myth in advance. Then they would pick information that they would put into the myth to make it work. But the people who worked on the council, on the 9/11 Commission, like the senior counsel, John Farmer, said that what government and military officials told Congress, the commission, the media, and the public about who knew what when was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. Here are the co-chairmen of the commission report. They said, to this day, we don't know why NORAD told us what they told us. It was just so far from the truth. So these are the people who actually wrote the report or worked on the report, telling you that it's a pack of lies. Then the Israelis constructed the memorial, the legacy, where the kids go in the school buses and get the walk around and go to the museum. The World Trade Center Memorial was designed by an Israeli, this man here, Michael Arad, who's the son of Moshe Arad, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. So from A to Z, from ideation to legacy, it's all been an Israeli project. For 17 years, the media has given us this story, a false narrative about 9/11 and the war on terror, all the while suppressing real evidence that disproves the official myth, like the molten metal that poured off the building, like the molten metal that was found in the basement of the World Trade Center, like the tiny droplets of molten iron that were found in the dust. Because the attitude of the media has been this. This is from 3 years later, New York Times. In the 3 years since 9/11, we've begun to understand that it's possible to know what happened without knowing what happened. That's their position. We don't need to know. Now, if the government and media are lying to us about 9/11, it means they are controlled by the same people who carried out 9/11. That is our political predicament today. Our government and media are controlled by the people who carried out 9/11. That gives you an idea of how evil this whole thing is. But they control our government. If they didn't control our government would be looking for the truth. If they didn't control the media would be investigating. But they don't. So the 6 crucial elements, this is the end of the program, the 6 crucial elements of the Zionist control of 9/11. I want to point out the hexagram star is not a Jewish symbol, it's a Zionist symbol. It was adopted by the First Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel. First, they controlled law enforcement. Michael Chertoff oversaw the investigation, the non-investigation, and control of the evidence. And prosecution. He should have prosecuted the crime. Point 2, they controlled the interpretation through the mass media of how the American people understood 9/11. Like Philip Zelikow wrote this commission report, and the media told us what had happened, their narrative, without proving it. Thirdly, litigation. As I said, Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein oversaw the tort litigation with a conflict of interest in which he excused the Israeli company, said, I don't know why you're here, you can go home, you're just the parent company. So they controlled those 3 things: investigation, interpretation, litigation. Then they controlled security at the airports on 9/11 and in the Twin Towers themselves. ICTS controlled airport security and passenger screening, and as I showed you, the Kroll Associates controlled security at the World Trade Center. Then they controlled our government at the time, and still do. The Zionist control of senior U.S. officials like Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Ashcroft, and Rice, it comes that they're senior advisors. Like here's Condoleezza Rice, and here's her senior advisor. This is Philip Zelikow. This was the senior advisor to Cheney. This was Deputy Secretary of Defense. These are the people that ran the government response. And they controlled the military. The Zionists had control over the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board through this cabal of guys called the Zionist neocons on the Defense Policy Board. They crafted the policy to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years. It's not an American interest. We have no interest in overthrowing Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. We're doing this for somebody else. So you need to understand who we're doing it for if you want to understand why we're fighting. This shows you, this is, in the Bible, this 6-pointed star is often called the star of a diabolical entity called Remphan from Egypt or something like that. But this is to show you that there is evil in this. The 9/11 is a very, very evil thing, evil incarnate. And we have to remember that the people who are involved in the cover-up of 9/11 are themselves working for the evil. And this is written by Alan Zabrowski. He wrote this in 2009. He said the evidential trail for 9/11 and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq runs from PNAC AIPAC and their cohorts through the mostly Jewish neocons in the Bush administration and back to the Israeli government. None of the denials and political machinations can alter that essential reality. And he wrote the introduction to my little book about the war on terror as well. He was the former director of studies at the U.S. Army War College. And this is the end of this program. And I want to end with this note that the only way to defeat deception is to increase awareness of the truth. And that's the thing, is that our nation is deceived. Our leaders are deceived. Our media is deceived. And they continue this deception on the public. And the only way we can reverse that trend and rectify the situation is to become more aware and to increase awareness of the public about what's really going on. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we can do that. Yeah, sir.
Well, I have questions and some comments. First of all, I watched you a couple times on the web. And in person, I'm very impressed. You're the first person to come up with a viable explanation as to how they brought the building down. I've heard a lot of fairy tales on that.
You have a question? You have a question? You have a question?
Yeah. Have you ever read Rene Guénon?
No.
He said in the 1940s, he said that capital would push its way, and I'm paraphrasing, I haven't read it in a long time. He said capital will push its way throughout the world, he said, destroy one nation after another. But then he said, until we run into Islam, and he said they would bankrupt us. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't agree with him.
But do you have a question? You have a question?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was asking if you had read that.
No.
And also, I do have it's another comment that I think what we have to do is stand back. I mean, we can look at Israel, but we can notice that capital, in other words, all the commercial interests and all the great expense and the movement of capital that has happened in order to create Israel isn't objecting and isn't fighting back. There's this, in other words, this unanimous agreement that Israel will conduct these affairs. And the outside interests aren't doing battle with them. They're accepting it.
But do you have a question?
Well, it isn't a question, it's a comment.
Okay,
Let's finish.
Let's do questions, because we have very little time.
Okay, you go ahead, but we should talk after this.
Okay, yeah,
I
all right.
have a different way to look at it.
Thank you. Thank you. Question?
So have you done any research on the role of Israel and AIPAC on the current internet censorship thing that's going on right now?
No, I haven't done any research about it, but it's pretty clear that Israel is involved in it. That's been openly reported. That Israel is working they have a team of people who are working to censor the internet. Yeah, and that they're like leading in this effort. This is Israeli operation. Sir.
So they got their bad guys, their bad side. They're the bad people. Who are the good people that are fighting against these fucks?
Well, the good people aren't fighting so much. The bad people, as I show in this presentation, I list them by name, by party, by ideology, because it's a mistake to think that all Israelis are behind this, for example, or all Jews. They're not. Jews are actually deceived into thinking that they must support Israel. And so they're doubly trapped, because they're trapped as we are in the deception, the overall deception, but then they feel this pressure from their community to support Israel, although they may not want to support Israel. So they're doubly deceived. But the only people that are standing up against this openly are people in the 9/11 Truth movement. That's why I say 9/11 Truth is the peace movement. But as you can see, looking around this nation, it's very, very small. Because people in this country are intimidated. They're in fear. They're in fear of crossing the line. They're in fear of criticizing Israel. They're in fear of challenging the government. And we live in a very, very strange period in American history where American people are really afraid of their government. Not the other way around, as it should be. Question?
I do have a question, and it has to do with Trump, as far as, it seems like he started out against them, and now it seems like every day we're pulling out of Syria, and then we end up bombing Syria.
Right.
What's going on?
That's a very good question. He was in Helsinki the other day with Putin on the stage. All lovey-dovey. We thought that this is great, a new chapter in American-Russian relations. Putin and Trump meeting, agreeing, speaking kindly to each other. Then he came back to the United States and issued new sanctions on Russia. And so I think what we're seeing is that Trump perhaps has good instincts. Like he said, his instinct was to pull out of Afghanistan. But then he said that in the White House, when you're in the White House, you realize that decisions are made a little bit differently. He was getting input from his advisors telling him that we have to continue the war in Afghanistan. So he's a man who's conflicted. He has his own instincts that he would like to pursue, but he's living in this information bubble where his advisors are the ones that advise him, and the television set apparently. So then he winds up doing things against his instincts. Now we hope, of course, that perhaps some of his good instincts will prevail. But as you see, we're going into a very dangerous period now, I have to say, because the sanctions against Iran kick in November, sanctions against Russia kick in, the situation in Syria is not getting better, the United States is going to stay in Syria, so it's all shaping up to be a very bad fall and a bad winter. Question? Anybody? Anybody? Sir?
Yes, I chatted a bit with Kevin Barrett, who is a Muslim and part of this 9/11 Truth Movement, and I've always wondered a bigger picture about why is it that Israel, wants the Oded Yinon plan? What's really, and why is Islam such a big enemy? And it dawned on me because Kevin had said in Islam, financial usury is essentially outlawed. So, if the world had financial usury outlawed, would we have the Rothschild family? Would we have that amazing? So what is your opinion on that?
Well, it's right when you say that there's the conflict over the lending of money at interest, usury, and there's also the fact that the Muslims at this point are sitting on top of a lot of the world's oil. So there's several motivations, and then there's this Zionist ideology of the Irgun and the people like Begin and Netanyahu that Israel should expand to its biblical borders. So all of these things combined, face Islamic resistance.
We hear about the oil, but we never hear about banking.
Right. But that's
Banking comes first, in my opinion.
Right. Finances come first. It takes money to do these things, and so
Right.
Especially when you make it out of thin air.
exactly. Question.
I have a question about the Christian Zionists.
Yeah.
Because they want to see Jesus come back
Yeah.
when Israel has its original
Yeah.
Oded Yinon plan is fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then their knowledge of what says in the Bible or wherever it's written is that at that point when Israel is in all that big district that they wanted to be originally, then Israel will be destroyed because they have to convert to Christianity.
God's law.
Huh?
They'll change God's law.
So, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the Christian Zionism is a big problem for us in this country because we have this, tens of millions of people who believe that serving Israel is God's commandment to Christians. And the Zionists play this crowd very well. And Christian Zionists are big supporters of Mr. Trump, we're big supporters of Ronald Reagan, big supporters of George Bush, and it's all based on a false interpretation of the Bible. They read the Schofield Bible and reckon that that's the way it is. Yeah.
I just want to mention, so I remember the picture on TV that George W. Bush, and what was a British minister again at that time? I forgot.
Tony Blair?
Tony Blair. They came out of the church with a Bible. He had sort of tears in their eyes when they decided we are going to go into invade Iraq.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was on sort of kind of a local TV. It was not one of the main media.
It's interesting that Tony Blair said that when he was one of the first people to meet George Bush when he was elected, and he said, he whispered in George Bush's ear, we have to do Iraq.
Yeah.
So their orders come from higher up. It's like the Rothschilds control Tony Blair, and whoever's British Prime Minister is controlled by the Rothschilds. And they have to do what they're told to do.
It actually comes from the Crown of England.
Okay.
That's where it comes from.
So Tony Blair influenced Bush then.
Yeah.
Bush's
Yeah.
religious
Yes.
belief.
Yes. Like Netanyahu said, America is something you can move very easily when you control the president. You got a question, sir?
Yeah, I just, and being aware of truth, are you aware of two new videos that have come out? One about the war games that were going on by James Corbett, excellent video, and also the one about the holograms, no airplanes, just a big show holograms.
I'll have to look at it.
Yeah, those are excellent for people to get, and I put them on TV last night.
Okay, thanks. Question?
Was Lyndon Johnson Jewish?
That's a good question. He may have been, if you read the books about Lyndon Johnson, he may have been, but he was certainly a member of a very small church that was very, very pro-Israel. His father told him, and some people think that he may be a crypto-Jew, but Lyndon Johnson was involved in early Zionist actions as congressman, when he was a congressman in the 1930s. He was involved in smuggling Jews from Poland, from Cuba, into Galveston, into Texas. And then he also, in the early 40s, he was sending weapons and hand grenades to Israel in boxes marked Texas grapefruit. So he was a very, very pro-Israel guy. And when USS Liberty was attacked, he called back the aircraft that were going to rescue the ship, saying, "I will not embarrass an ally."
They also had to go instead of going to Crete, which was the closest seaport, he had to go 463 miles to Malta.
Right.
With the dying and the wounded and the 40-foot-old in the ship.
Right. Good point. Question?
So John F. Kennedy was also the last one who understood the deception, and then everybody knows what happened to him. Is that the fear that our politicians have? Or
Yeah, it seems like John F. Kennedy was the last great reformer, a president who sought to reform some of the problems in this country, with the Federal Reserve, with the money system, with the Israeli nuclear weapons programs, with everything, with the organized crime in this country. He and his brother were attacking organized crime in a big way. And organized crime in Chicago, the Jewish organized crime criminals, they're the ones who got LBJ on the ticket. So that they had Jake Arvey was, for example, instrumental in getting, so that in this way they had their Trojan horse. So that if Kennedy didn't work out, they had the backup plan, and LBJ was the backup. Question?
P-Tech was a Saudi company. It was intimately involved in
P-Tech?
P-Tech.
P-Tech was not a Saudi company. P-Tech was a Lebanese company, supposedly owned by a couple Lebanese guys, with some Saudi financing. Yes.
So what's the connection between Israel and the Saudis and the Lebanese?
Okay, that's a big question. She's talking about P-Tech. P-Tech was a company in Quincy, Massachusetts that made this enterprise software that was running on all the big computers, the networks in the U.S. government and the military on 9/11. 9/11 was a computer crime in that computer systems did not work, communications did not work, so that like the pilots, the rescue planes that came from Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts were supposed to go to New York City, but instead they wound up going out into the ocean and were ineffective in their response. So P-Tech was this enterprise software company which enables a super user to know exactly what's going on in the entire network of an operation, computer network, in real time. P-Tech was supposedly, it was an Arab front company. There were a couple Arab Muslims from Lebanon who were the owners. But now, if this was an Arab Muslim company with Saudi terror financing, why would it be running on Pentagon computers, and White House computers, and IRS computers, and everything, all the computers? It was started up by in the startup of this company in 1994. There was a Jewish lawyer from Worcester, Massachusetts, and Michael Goff. And Michael Goff was in charge of setting the company up, getting the software, marketing the company, getting it sold, and he also worked for an Israeli company called Guardium, which is a Mossad company. So you have to understand, in my book, Solving 9/11, and the other Solving 9/11 book as well, you have to read about the computer networks, because this is a very big subject. But cybersecurity for the Pentagon was in the hands of the Israelis. Amit Yoran was an Israeli guy who graduated from West Point, who became the cybersecurity czar for the entire Department of Defense.
What was his name again?
Amit Yoran, Y-O-R-A-N. And this is a guy who runs hacking operations. And you have to understand that Israel, the biggest part of the Israeli army, is a unit called Unit 8200, which does cyber hacking, which does hacking into computer systems, which does all this computer stuff. And what appears to have happened is that they used this Jewish lawyer who was working at P-TECH to bring the software from Israel into the P-TECH software. And that is what gave the Israelis super user access on 9/11.
So the others were just fronts? The other eight?
Yeah, there's a lot of front companies. I described several of them in my book. In Florida, in Massachusetts, the one that's Urban Moving Systems, that was supposedly a moving company. Well, it was actually Israeli intelligence. The same thing with this P-TECH. It was presented as a Muslim company from Lebanese Muslim guys. I called up the Muslim Lebanese guy and talked to him. He didn't want to talk very much because it's a front. It's a front. Now, when Israeli intelligence sets up a front company with a facade of Arabness and Muslimness, something's going on.
But it's all a facade anyway. Even when you say Israeli, they're hiding. That's the facade for them. They're the Zionists. They're bad guys. They've been playing since Babylonian times.
Yeah.
The same thing, and they hide under whatever they are. So
Yeah.
when we say Israeli, we're actually not really calling it what it is. I mean, they could be hiding behind a Christian front or a Arab front or whatever. They'll hide. They'll get in wherever they possibly can.
Okay. Question, ma'am.
Could you tell us what we can do besides writing to your congressman doesn't do any good?
Yeah.
I've protested on the streets down in downtown Seattle, it doesn't do anything. What on earth can we do as American citizens to save us from this next Holocaust war that's going to happen?
That's a great question. I wish there were an easy answer to it. There isn't. The people I've been working on this operation now for 17 years. I can't believe so much time has gone by. I've been writing about this since 2001. I thought that the American people, when they, I started writing these articles back in 2001. They were printed in a weekly paper in Washington D.C. And did it change anything? No. It's like Netanyahu says it's very easy to turn America, but we don't seem to be able to turn it any which way. We seem to be stuck on this hijacked airplane, headed for the World Trade Center, and we can't change course. And how do we do it? This is, increase awareness of the truth. But that's hard. That's hard. Slowly, we're reaching a few more people, and people are becoming aware that we were lied to about 9/11, and that we've been lied to about the war on terror. But does it change anything? Are we able to arrest this movement? It doesn't seem like we can do anything.
It gets more frightening as you get further into it.
Exactly, but the thing is, what we cannot do is we cannot give up and think that our efforts are in vain. We have to continue our efforts the best we can to inform our fellow citizens of our dilemma, and as we reach more and more people, here you have 40 people or so, but people see this on the internet. People are waking up. A lot of people are afraid or unable to come to an event like this, but they support us. And it's a growing awareness, but what it has to turn into a movement. It has to turn into a movement in which there's a popular resistance to the war. I don't know what it's going to take because our media lies to us all the time.
The media is owned by the
Exactly. Well, it's owned by 6 corporations, and it makes the people complacent because they don't tell us about the war. They don't tell us about what's going on.
May I say something?
Well, let's see if anybody has any questions. Question in the back, sir.
Do you think it would be effective to visit our local police departments with this information and packets like I've got here?
Yeah.
I mean, Brandon and I have started doing this. We're going to introduce it as a challenge, your local police department challenge, and we've been delivering packets of information and videos and literature, and trying to inform our leaders. I don't attend church, but maybe your church leader might want to. You think that might be effective to give this information to the community leaders?
Yes. It's we need to inform everybody, the military, the law enforcement, everybody we can. But many people feel that they don't want to buck the trend. They don't want to go against the way that things are going. And we have to tell people that going along with a lie and allowing your nation to be enslaved to this lie is counterproductive and dangerous. It's harmful. We're harming ourselves by accepting this lie and going through these wars. We're spending all the money. Our country's being taken down into the gutter. Our morality, our prestige is all going down. We have to stop it. Good. You want to say something?
I was going to say, people that have been around this long before any of us here have understood that first you have to educate, then you organize, then you act. And the problem we face is the confusion, the disinformation, and the fact that the public, people do not spend time actually learning and understanding what they're looking at. You come to a meeting like this and you learn factoids, things. And I'm not saying they're not true. I'm amazed at how much you actually know. You've actually put a lot of work into this. But the trick to it is to understand it. To understand who's doing it, what the motives are.
That's what I tried to explain. That's what I tried to explain.
I know you're trying to explain. I know. I'm not belittling it. That's you do a good job. But first, the public has to make the effort, individually, to learn.
Yeah, but we like getting back to her question. We don't have to get 99% of the public behind us.
No.
That's not going to happen. We just need to
1%.
reach a critical mass of 10% of the population.
1% would be very good.
Well, people with the wherewithal, but if we get 10% of the population to understand this, revolutions are not made. Big changes don't occur because you have 99% of the population. It's when you have enough people who can make things happen.
That's right.
There's a large part of the population that is not going to give a damn any which way. They simply want their creature comforts and.
How did Phyllis Schlafly say it? She said that a tiny percentage make things happen.
Yeah.
A slightly larger number watch things happen, and the vast multitude never knew what happened.
There you go.
If anybody wants to help me, I'll be at Bothell UW campus tomorrow, passing out
Peace,
flyers.
everybody.
Thank
So
you.
if anybody
Thanks,
wants
Rob.
to join me, you're welcome to.
Where was it?
It's at Bothell UW campus.
What time?
I'll be down there at about 9:30 a.m.
You have a question?
Yeah. What about the rest of the world? Do you have a sense that there's a growing awareness out there in the rest of the world where maybe the Zionists don't have quite as much influence over the mass media as they do here?
Well, it's hard to judge because they don't do polls and things like that.
Yeah.
They haven't done polls in this country since 2006. So it's hard to know what percentage of people in this country understand we've been lied to. But it's not just that they need to understand we've been lied to, but they need to understand what is the reality, what really happened. Because a lot of people think that Saudis did it, or that Illuminati did it, or Illuminati may have been involved. But I mean, it's like they believe all kinds of things. But understanding the actual, real life, operational characters in the crime is essential. And there's a group called Lawyers for 9/11 Truth, I think, and they are pushing for a grand jury. That's one thing that's moving forward. They presented the request for a grand jury. A judge named Berman, or an attorney general named Berman in New York, has to respond to the request, impanel a grand jury or refuse to impanel a grand jury. So there is some movement in that direction, but it's happening very slowly, far too slowly. Because the danger is that this country and other countries will be taken into war in Iran, against Iran, before we can get any resolution to this. And you see, they're getting everything they wanted. All the wars they wanted, they're getting. And we are simply unable to find the brake pedal because we don't have that power. We're really, although this is a democratic state, we have very little power. It's very hard for us to have any effect. You had a question?
I was just thinking, all the other false flags, whether they're school shootings or bombings, are they tied? Are they Israelis, or is that a whole other faction that's causing terror in our country?
Well, that's a very good question. She's asking about this terrorism. Is the terrorism all tied to the Israelis? Well, I can point out one thing. In Europe, there were these trucks driving down in Nice, I think it was, down the sidewalk, killing people. And then there was an attack in Munich at a Burger King or McDonald's. And it turned out that the same German guy was in both places videotaping it, the attack as it happened.
Right.
And it turns out that he's married to an Israeli woman who is a senior person at Unit 8200. I think Einat Wilf. And they happened to be in Nice, ready with a camera to photograph the truck going down the street. And they happened to be in Munich, outside of McDonald's, photographing when the shooting happened. Well, that looks to me very much like that was an Israeli operation. So whether they're involved in all of them, I don't know. You know, they were happening for a while so frequently and so often that you hardly can remember which was the last one.
Paris, you got a ton.
Yeah,
The marathon bombing, there was a guy had his leg blown off, he
But
was in a
the-
wheelchair, and they showed up at the, I think the Paris bombing or whatever.
Yeah, and the bombing,
Carried out, same guy.
the bombing,
But yeah, he was an amputee, so it made it look like,
yeah, the bombing in Boston is very interesting. You know, we have videos of the Chernayev brothers, and Joker Chernayev was the younger brother, was wearing a white backpack, as white as my shirt. But the FBI agent who was running the operation said, the investigation said that on day 2, he said both bombs were in black nylon backpacks. Well, Joker Chernayev never had a black nylon backpack, so why is he even a suspect? And this is the guy they, no, Chechen, I think. And this is the guy, Muslim. And this is the guy they found in the boat, remember?
Yeah.
And then they took him to a hospital, and an Israeli doctor operated on him and did something to his vocal cords, removed the vocal cords or something like that. And then they later, days later, they went to the boat and found, he had written on the wall, he had written on the side of the wall what he had done. You know, it's just absurd. It's absurd.
Were those men in the khaki pants?
The Kraft,
They
right.
have the backpacks.
Right.
Do you know what the connect? Is there an Israeli connection?
Well, the Kraft is a big military-industrial, military subcontractor.
Yeah.
So they're probably, they're probably the guys that put the bombs out there. They had the heavy pack because the bombs were in pressure cookers or something. They were heavy. Joker Chernayev had a backpack just on one shoulder, very lightweight. Looked like it had maybe a sack lunch in there or something. Not a pressure cooker, nothing like that.
So you touched on something earlier about the grand juries. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how we get power back, is we get back in control of the court systems where we can prosecute these guys with citizens' grand juries.
They had
The only way we have to defend that is through, weapons. We have to have our own army, and that's the reason for these school shootings and everything like that, is to take away everybody's guns and to scare everybody. And we go, so.
Well, part of it is, as I pointed out, what the Israelis are doing in Lebanon. They started in Lebanon. They practiced in Lebanon. They practiced in Palestine, in Israel. Remember, a few years ago, there were bombings going off all the time in Israel. So they practiced in Israel, then they practiced in Lebanon, and then they applied it in Iraq. Then they applied it on the big picture. They applied it to the whole nation, the whole world, the United States. So in order to keep people insecure and on their toes, you need to frequently throw another log on the fire. And that's what they're doing. That's what the terrorism is all about. It's meant to make us afraid and unable to think clearly, to react emotionally rather than with our mind. Wait, question? You have a question?
I'd like to know if you're afraid, because I am afraid if I'm too outspoken or I'm very careful about what I say. I'm not for myself, but for my family. Aren't you afraid? Have you ever gotten any threats?
Oh, well, yeah. I live in Sweden now because I was attacked by undercover police in Illinois, outside Chicago. I was prosecuted. I was charged with resisting their arrest. I didn't know who they were. They weren't police. They didn't have any identification. And they broke my arm, tasered me, and all this kind of stuff, and prosecuted me. And I fought it in Cook County Court, 4-day trial. Lost. It was a hung jury. The judge sent them back with special instructions. They came back with conviction on both misdemeanors. And so, yeah, I paid a huge price for this. I'm still alive though, and my family's paid a huge price. But if I had done nothing, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Because I studied this stuff. I studied, Israeli-Palestinian history at university. I paid a great deal of attention to Israeli crimes and Israeli treachery, And if I were to ignore the subject, I would be abandoning my country to the jackals. You can't just do that. So I carry on, and this is a little mini trip. This is not a marathon tour. I'm only here. I'll be speaking on a radio show tomorrow with Jason Goodman, a Jewish guy in New York. He's gonna have me on. And, it's you have to keep doing this as best you can because. If they go to war with Russia or Iran, it'll be something that you don't want to think about.
It's the end of the world.
It's not good. It's not good. And we're living in times when, you know, people who think about Armageddon, God, you just look at the map of Syria and what's going on there, you say,
I really think that the threat of the Russian thing, the Iranian thing, is more to scare the crap out of people,
Right.
like the Cold War.
Right.
They'll go in and destroy us before that even happens. Like they're sending all these refugees up into Europe.
Right, right.
If you're trying to get rid of a fire ant pile, you can throw poison at it, water at it, whatever, fire, whatever. They'll still be there.
Right.
But you take another fire ant hill pile and you take a shovel there and you dump it on that one, and vice versa. They'll kill each other, which is exactly what they're doing. They don't need nuclear war. They don't need anything like that. That's just to scare us.
right,
That's
they're doing a good job. But you have a question back there?
Yeah, real quickly, in answer to your question, ma'am, about what we can do, one thing you can do very easily is get Robert David Steele's information about the police, about the 9/11 truth, and it's about 101 pages, and you can share it with people, like I did. I did a little workshop on it last week. It was outstanding, and people really got energized. And you can share this with your groups. It's just 101 pages of different things. I don't have enough stuff to share.
Any more questions?
Can I
Or,
take a copy?
no.
I would like to say one.
Wait, does anybody have any questions? I wanted to say one thing. I have a few of these books with me. I only have like 18 with me, but I have this little book. This book, I wrote this book in 2017.
Oh, I understand.
And wait. I wrote this book to inform the American people about what the war on terror is really all about. And I wrote it with the idea of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Like it's meant to be a small, easily read book that you can share with other people. So if you'd like to support my efforts, you can get a copy of this book signed for $20. And I'll be up here afterwards, and if you'd like that. And it's meant to be shared with people. It's meant to be spread around, because it's one thing if you know, but you need to inform your neighbors and your family. Any more questions?
Christmas is right around the corner. Those are
Christmas.
small enough for good stocking stuffers.
Any questions? Okay, I want to thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.